Hey everyone, do you remember that Coca-Cola ad that made you feel like you were back in your childhood? Or that Nintendo commercial that brought back memories of your first gaming console?
Those are perfect examples of what we're diving into today. Welcome, listeners, to another exciting episode of the Marketing Science Lab podcast. I'm Sophie.
And I'm Alex. Today we're exploring a fascinating topic that's making waves in the marketing world, nostalgic advertising, and its potential to foster brand love.
That's right, Alex. We've all experienced that warm, fuzzy feeling when we see an ad that takes us back in time. But is there more to nostalgic advertising than just evoking fond memories?
Absolutely, Sophie. We'll be exploring a groundbreaking study that examines how different types of nostalgia in advertising affect consumers' love for brands across developed and developing countries.
Before we dive into the research, let's set the stage. Alex, can you give our listeners a quick overview of what we mean by nostalgic advertising?
Of course, Sophie, nostalgic advertising is a marketing strategy that taps into consumer sentimental longing for the past. It can take two main forms: personal nostalgia, which evokes memories from an individual's own past experiences, and historical nostalgia, which references a collective past or era that the individual may not have directly experienced.
Great explanation. And it's worth noting that nostalgia in advertising has made a significant comeback in recent years. We've seen it everywhere, from Super Bowl commercials to social media campaigns.
That's right, Sophie. Brands like Disney, Gucci, Netflix, and Coca-Cola have all embraced nostalgia in their marketing strategies. It's become such a trend that Advertising Week even highlighted it as one to watch.
Absolutely, Alex. And we've seen some great examples recently. In the UK, Frankie Benny's launched their Bring It Back campaign in April 2023, advertising a menu with dishes and prices from 2003. And Nestle celebrated the 70th anniversary of Shreddies by encouraging consumers to share their favorite memories using the hashtag Shreddy70.
Those are fantastic examples, Sophie. Now let's talk about the study we're focusing on today. It's titled How Nostalgia and Advertising Increases Brand Love, a cross-country study by researchers Silvia Grappi, Veronique Pauls de Lasos, Giuseppe Papagliento, and Lia Zarentinello.
This study is particularly interesting because it looks at how nostalgic advertising affects brand love in both a developed country, the UK, and a developing country, India.
Before we get into the findings, Sophie, can you explain what we mean by brand love?
Certainly, Alex. Brand love is a concept in marketing that goes beyond simple brand preference or loyalty. It's an intense emotional attachment that consumers develop for a particular brand. It's characterized by passion, positive emotional connection, and even a sense of anticipated separation distress if the brand were to become unavailable.
That's a powerful concept. So this study is essentially looking at whether nostalgic advertising can help create or strengthen that intense emotional connection between consumers and brands.
Exactly, Alex. And what makes the study unique is that it's comparing the effectiveness of personal nostalgia versus historical nostalgia in two very different markets.
Let's dive into the methodology. How did the researchers approach this study?
The researchers conducted a pre-test and post-test quasi-experimental study with two representative samples, 277 British consumers and 255 Indian consumers. Participants were randomly exposed to one of three types of ads: one evoking personal nostalgia, one evoking historical nostalgia, or a non-nostalgic ad.
And what were the key findings?
The results were fascinating, Alex. First, they found that nostalgic advertising does indeed increase brand love in both countries. However, the effectiveness of each type of nostalgia varied depending on the country.
That's interesting. Can you break that down for us?
Sure, in the UK, which represents a developed country, personal nostalgia was found to increase brand love more significantly than historical nostalgia. However, in India, representing a developing country, historical nostalgia was more effective in fostering brand love.
That's a crucial distinction. Why do you think there's such a difference between the two countries?
The researchers suggest it might be related to cultural differences. Developed countries like the UK tend to be more individualistic, placing greater emphasis on personal experiences. In contrast, developing countries like India often have more collectivist cultures, where shared history and heritage play a more significant role.
That makes sense. It really highlights the importance of understanding cultural nuances when crafting global marketing campaigns.
Absolutely. This study underscores the need for marketers to tailor their nostalgic approaches based on the target country's level of development and cultural context.
So, what are the practical implications of this research of marketers?
There are several key takeaways, Alex. First, marketers should consider using nostalgic advertising as a tool to build long-term brand value and foster brand love. However, they need to be mindful of cultural differences when crafting nostalgic campaigns for global markets.
Any specific recommendations?
Yes, based on this study, marketers targeting developed countries like the UK should focus more on personal nostalgia in their advertising. For developing countries like India, emphasizing historical nostalgia might be more effective.
That's valuable insight. It seems like nostalgia can be a powerful tool in a marketer's arsenal, but it needs to be wielded carefully and with cultural sensitivity.
Exactly, Alex. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Marketers need to understand their target audience and tailor their nostalgic messaging accordingly.
This study really opens up a lot of interesting questions about the intersection of culture, emotion, and advertising. Are there any limitations to this research that our listeners should be aware of?
Good question, Alex. While this study provides valuable insights, it's important to note that it only looked at 2 countries. Further research across more countries and cultures would be beneficial to see if these patterns hold true on a broader scale.
That's a great point, Sophie. It also makes me wonder about the long-term effects of nostalgic advertising. Does the impact on brand love persist over time, or is it a short-term effect?
That's an excellent question for future research, Alex. It would be fascinating to see a longitudinal study on this topic.
Absolutely. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. To wrap up, what would you say are the key takeaways for our listeners?
I'd say the main points are: first, nostalgic advertising can be an effective tool for increasing brand love. Second, the type of nostalgia that works best varies between developed and developing countries. And third, marketers need to carefully consider cultural context when using nostalgia in their campaigns.
Great summary, Sophie. This research really highlights the complexity of global marketing and the importance of understanding cultural nuances.
Absolutely, Alex. It's a reminder that effective marketing is as much about understanding people and cultures as it is about products and strategies.
Well said, Sophie. And that brings us to the end of today's episode. We hope our listeners found this discussion on nostalgic advertising and brand love insightful and applicable to their own marketing efforts.
Before we go, we'd love to hear from our listeners. Take a moment to think about a recent ad that made you feel nostalgic. What emotions did it trigger? What memories came flooding back?
Great question, Sophie. Listeners, share your thoughts with us on social media or the comments section of our Substack newsletter. We'd love to hear about your experiences with nostalgic advertising.
And remember, whether you're targeting developed or developing markets, authenticity in nostalgic advertising is key. It's not just about looking back, it's about creating meaningful connections with your audience that last well into the future.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe to Marketing Science Lab on your favorite podcast platform. Leave us a review and share this episode with fellow marketers who might benefit from understanding the power of nostalgia in advertising.
You can find more resources and join the conversation on our website at marketingsciencelab.org. Until next time, keep exploring the fascinating world of marketing science.
And remember, nostalgia isn't just about looking back, it's about creating meaningful connections with your audience that last well into the future. Thanks for listening. I miss you already. See you next week.